What is up, Podheads? Episode 79 of the Podioslave podcast. I am here with Anthony and Nate, as always. Boys, how are we doing tonight?
Oh, excellent. Tonight was a nerdery special. Can't wait to dig into it. What have we got, Twan?
What's up, guys? Anthony here. Yeah, we had quite the conversation. We had the one and only Damian Moyal from As Friends Rust, from Culture, from Morning Again, from Shai Hulud, Bird of Ill Omen. Go on his Wikipedia page. You'll find half of the Florida bands in the 90s. He's, in our eyes, quite the icon. We've always followed a lot of his bands over the years, and certainly he's still doing his thing on the music front with his band Damien Done. But this is it's a special episode for us. We love the album One by As Friends Rust. We think it's a seminal record that has transcended genres. It's held up over 20 years, and we wanted to pay respects to it. So we hit up Damien to do kind of a 20-year retro on One, and it's not just that. It's, you know, kind of the history of As Friends Rust and his musical career over the years, and we get into all that with Damien. And yeah, this is an awesome conversation, and we may do a part 2 down the road, which will focus more on, you know, kind of music in general, hardcore in general, and, you know, just kind of reacting to bands and music over the years. But for this episode, we got a deep dive on One. We get some history of As Friends Rust. Damien, thank you so much, and we're going to get into it right now.
If you like what you hear, please go back and check out some of our other interviews. We've had Frank Turner, singer-songwriter. We've had Brennan Garone of Incendiary, Chad Neptune of Strong Arm and Further Seems Forever, Nick Wheeler of the All-American Rejects, Ryan Sinnott of the Distillers, and Peanut of 311.
We're here with Damian Moyal. Damien, appreciate you jumping on the podcast, hanging out with us tonight. How's it going?
Going pretty well. Thanks for having me.
So, Damien, you probably don't realize it, but we've been kind of circling this wagon with you for probably 15 years. Back in 2007, I did a fanzine. It was based out of Maine. It was called Gilded City Fanzine, and I reached out to As Friends Rust. I can't remember what medium, if it was MySpace at the time or some email I found. I don't know who I was chatting with, one of you guys, because I wanted to do an interview and like a cover story with you guys. And whoever responded said yes and was down, so I was super stoked about it. But I ended up delaying the zine for a while and never followed up with you guys. And I put out an interview with Carl from Earth Crisis as the cover story. So that was our first go-around. So does that ring a bell? Do you remember getting hit up, Anthony from Maine?
Doesn't ring a bell, but Earth Crisis and AFR pretty interchangeable. So
yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't remember. It was probably me. I feel like I'm kind of the only person who's ever tended to any social media stuff for the band.
Right on. So that was the first go-around. Second go-around was in the early days of Instagram. Like, this was back in like 2012. I posted a As Friends Rust One like appreciation post. Took a photo of the album. You liked it. So I was like, oh shit, that's Damien. Like that's cool. Like, is this how IG works? Whatever. We started commenting back and forth, and I left that exchange thinking, damn, I really want to chat with him. So this was like 10 years ago. So I bring all that up to say, this is a long time in the making, and this was meant to be.
All right.
More for Anthony than you, obviously. I'm just but pretty excited. We were pretty excited when we reached out and you said, yeah, let's do it. Especially Anthony being as big a fan. He kind of turned me onto you and Nate onto you a little later. But back when Anthony and I lived together, I think you had 10 as a ringtone, right?
That's right. I did. Yeah. Yep. And it's now my wife's ringtone.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Whose favorite band is Kings of Leon. So you can see how that's extended genres, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, that song for some reason got a lot more traction than we thought it was. It was kind of the extra, the like, oh, we need one more. I mean, it was pretty prepared and buttoned up on the music side, but I didn't have anything ready for that one, and I think that's what I ended up singing about. Right? It was like
exactly.
Yeah.
not having any lyrics.
Yeah. But it worked. I mean, we've all been like, damn, what do I do here?
Yeah.
I'm still there.
I think we are too.
Yeah. When lightning strikes, you go, right? So for Anthony, it was, laying the breadcrumbs for quite a while. So here we are. This is awesome, man. Stoked to have you.
Yeah. Great to be here.
So you've been in a million bands. I think anyone who's into this music knows the resume. I think for this conversation, we're pretty much going to keep it in the As Friends Rust realm. One turns 20 this year. Super special record. I think it blends melody and aggression like as good as any album. The lyrics, and this is where you come in, they're thoughtful, intelligent. I think they're tongue-in-cheek and sarcastic, which goes over a lot of people's heads. But before we get into that, let's kind of set the stage. So mid-90s, you're in Morning Again, Ill Omen, Culture, Shai Hulud, and then you pivot, I believe, from Ill Omen to a band that's much lighter in sound in As Friends Rust. So how does that even happen?
Well, that would have been 96. I was always listening to much lighter stuff, and it was kind of it was circumstantial, I guess, or kind of just accidental that I ended up on this trajectory of like heavy and heavier bands. I think it was just because I kind of started with Culture. I mean, I had some smaller bands before that, but that just sort of cemented me, especially when you take a vegan straight edge kind of position. You're sort of locked into this like screamy, metallic, brutal kind of you're sort of in this corner. And then the Ill Omen thing was kind of, listening to a lot of dystopia and His Hero's Gone and just kind of wanting to do something a little more chaotic and unhinged, because Culture and Morning Again, Shai Hulud were very, put together, I guess, structured. But it still wasn't the majority of what I listened to kind of at any of those points. When it came to hardcore, I was always into more melodic stuff. It was always Dag Nasty, 7 Seconds, Turning Point, Gorilla Biscuits, anything that had, a bit of melody. And I always favored hardcore that was where the singers yelled versus screamed.
Right. Yep.
And here I found myself for years just screaming and shredding my throat more and more with every band. And finally, I think I just reached a point where I was like, I want to play the kind of hardcore that I like to listen to. I want it fast and melodic. I'd had a little taste of that in Shai Hulud, and I kind of felt like I wanted to explore that more. And I met these guys who had a band going at the time called Wayside. And I think for whatever reason, they weren't thrilled with the vocals. So they asked me to kind of swing by practice one day, and they didn't invite their singer. And I just kind of, messed around a little bit with them. And we sort of decided to just start a new band.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Damien, I got a question on that. Did you have like songs written for this type of like band to come, like a vehicle? Like, all right, once I find that band where I can address these songs, I'll dig these out of my notebook kind of thing? Or did you start fresh?
No, started fresh.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Although the name As Friends Rust did come from a Ill Omen lyric. There was a line that said something about like as friends rust from exposure to exposure. And we just took that little segment.
It's an awesome band name. Like,
yeah,
it's a feeling. I remember Tuan telling me that the name, you talking about you years ago, and be like, wow, yeah, that makes sense. And then listening and being like, all right, cool. This all kind of fits. You said something interesting to me, and we've spoken to a handful of musicians over the last year and a half, and we spoke with Frank Turner back in April, and he started on kind of the heavier hardcore-y side and went to singer-songwriter, and he was like, it wasn't what I was listening to at the end of the day. This is what I was listening to. I didn't want to do the heavy stuff all the time. I'd get off stage and then put something completely different on, and that ended up being the lane that he went in. So to hear you say it too, obviously a little bit different, but very similar, it makes sense. And then now we've heard it in a couple different places. That's kind of wild to me.
Yeah, it's you feel like you've been sort of maybe paying attention to paying a disproportionate amount of attention to your influences, where it was like, all right, cool. I came from a metal background before all this, and I like whatever, Earth Crisis, but it's been years and I'm still screaming and I just want to do something else. And yeah, there was that melodic hardcore influence when it came to hardcore, but then I was also into at the time, a lot of indie rock stuff. Like I've always loved Superchunk and Versus and Low and Codeine and slower stuff like that. And then and somewhere in the middle, I guess, would be like Sam I Am and Split Lip. And I feel like the very early As Friends Rust stuff, you could hear the Sam I Am and Split Lip even in the guitars. So yeah, it was just it was perfect. Here were these kids who couldn't play chuggy, self-righteous metallic hardcore if they tried. Right. And I was looking to do anything but that myself. So it was perfect.
When I listen to Culture, I can tell it's you. And there's some elements of singing-ish, right? But with As Friends Rust, there's obviously singing. So had you been singing at all before? Like clean singing before As Friends Rust?
No, never. I think the Culture, you're probably referencing maybe the Born of You LP. I think there were a couple of attempts at cleaner vocals because, again, listening to stuff like Endpoint or Turning Point, all the points, I liked the idea of some passages that were clean. I liked the idea of doubling vocals. I did a lot of doubling where there was a talking, kind of clean talking track under a screaming track. And there were a couple of lines that were a little melodic and singy on that Culture album. I don't think they were very well executed. That was kind of my first Culture was my first experience in the studio, so it was all kind of new. The timing's a little questionable, and there are some imperfections. I did it a little bit more on the Morning Again stuff, maybe to worse effect than with Culture. But yeah, by the time As Friends Rust hit, I was just like, I don't know that I even saw it so much as screaming as just again, like yelling melodically.
Because I know, like on Treating Myself to a Bullet, it's like, well, that sounds like early Damien on the early As Friends Rust stuff. Like you can tell it's you.
Right. Yeah. And that was after that first wave of As Friends Rust. That was like, there was Culture. As Friends Rust was sort of in between two stints in Culture. Yeah. For me. And that was the second stint. But yeah, by then I was sort of like borrowing. And in fact, the very last song that the last lineup of Culture wrote, which never got recorded, but there is a live version floating around. It was called Pimping the Revolution. There was some heated debate within that lineup of the band because by then we were mostly As Friends Rust members.
Oh, wow.
At the same time, both bands were active. And it basically, it really sounded like an As Friends Rust. It was a Culture song that sounded like an As Friends Rust song. Like a little screamier and a little more metallic on the kind of guitar lick side, but yeah, the two were definitely starting to intersect and overlap and meld.
You kind of transition to, you've got a couple of demos, some splits, a few EPs early on, late 90s now before we get into the album the one that turns 20 this year. And you put those out on a label based out of Belgium, am I correct?
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Well, that was again Culture and Morning Again. It was Good Life Recordings from Belgium. Had kind of been they had been doing really well regionally. They were sort of the victory of Western Europe, I guess, or at least Belgium. Good bands, nice quality kind of product. It was just a very the label just felt sort of professional by hardcore standards, I guess. Mm-hmm. And they approached Morning Again and Culture at the same time because I guess those would have been the first signings from abroad or like American bands. And actually, I believe when he reached out to Morning Again, he didn't know that I was no longer in Morning Again. And when he reached out to Culture, he didn't know that I was back in Culture. But anyway, both bands ended up putting out records on Good Life at the same time, went to Europe the same summer for the first time at the same time. So we just had this relationship with Edward from Good Life. And I think that on the second Culture tour in 98, I brought As Friends Rust demos. Nice. I brought a bunch of tapes with me and I just kind of handed them out. I may have, it's possible I mailed one to Edward before all that, but I remember bringing it and kind of like strategically trying to figure out who to hand these, 10 tapes to or whatever. But yeah, Edward kind of just right away was like, let's do it. Let's put it out. But there was also, it was a little bit of a weird situation because that first lineup, which broke up pretty quickly, most of the songs on the first release, The Fists of Time, which Good Life, that was the first As Friends Rust release, all but the first song were from that first lineup. So there was this kind of having to get their blessing to continue the band and put out those songs, which they were fine with it. They were kind of excited that they were going to see the light of day.
That's cool.
At all. Yeah. But yeah, so that's how the relationship formed. Yeah. And that's how we became a Belgian band.
So that was like your first shoe into like an international tour kind of simultaneously, or?
Yeah. The first Culture tour in 97 was the first European tour. And that was it for me. I was at that point, I was like, all right, this is all I want to do for the next however many years I can get away with not having to think about doing something else.
That's so interesting to me. Like you're kind of straddling bands, and I'm sure like it's probably difficult to, I mean, I don't know how often you guys practiced, but to park one project and focus on the other. I mean, I'm sure a riff came up and you're like, all right, well, which band's going to get this? You know what I mean? Or which lyrics are going to go where? Was there any of that?
I remember having that struggle with lyrics. Yeah, a lot, especially around the time that As Friends Rust formed, when I was still doing Bird of Ill Omen. And then I was doing both bands, Bird of Ill Omen and the newly, they were both newly formed As Friends Rust, when I rejoined Culture. I think there might have been a point where there were three, and then As Friends Rust fell apart, and then it was just Bird of Ill Omen and Culture, and then finally just chose Culture and moved to Gainesville. But yeah, I remember there being a lot of, because I was writing kind of outside of the music at the time, which is weird because I feel like I've always kind of written lyrics to recordings of songs from rehearsals, but I guess I was maybe just writing a lot kind of independently. And then sometimes if something would fit, it was just like by sheer luck. Mm-hmm. But I do remember having kind of different, each band had a different sort of color to me. And the lyrics were, sometimes there was subject matter that was sort of the same in one song for one band as it was in another for another, but the approach was different. So I think I knew how to take a different point of view in the song to make it more squarely a Bird of Ill Omen song or an As Friends Rust song. But there was always a little bit of work to be done in figuring out which band should get it and then how to make it that band's.
So you can like put some stuff down. It's kind of the skeleton of it, and then think, okay, if I do this with it, it will go that way.
Right.
To say Bird of Ill Omen, or if I can do this with it, it'll go towards Culture or As Friends Rust. That's interesting.
Yep. Yeah.
But no vegan straight edge on the As Friends Rust stuff.
No. Actually, in fact, not even on the Morning Again stuff. By the time we started that, that was kind of a mandate for me because I was being asked to join this new band with John from Culture, who had been sort of most of the conflict in the band was between he and I in Culture, which led to me leaving, and then a few months later him leaving for whatever reasons, and then he called me up, and it was like, of all the guys in the band to call me up to start a new thing, I didn't think it would be John. And a lot of that conflict was because we had different perspectives on how those issues should be addressed and how the band was going to position itself,
right. Totally.
And how it was going to talk about these lifestyles. And I think he was maybe coming from more of a militant kind of, it was more of a victory kind of mindset. Whereas
totally.
I was sort of more ebullition, I guess. So there was this sort of conflict, and yeah, when he asked me, I remember saying, it was a mandate. I was like, I can't even consider this if it's going to be a vegan straight edge band, because I'm not doing that with you again. And he was like, no, we just write about whatever you want to write about. So yeah, until I left, when they started slapping X's on everything, there were no vegan straight edge lyrics for Morning Again either. which a lot of people are actually surprised to find out, because I think there were after I left. But yeah, no vegan straight edge lyrics for As Friends Rust, which is a good thing, because that wouldn't have lasted long anyway.
Good Life Recordings was your home for a while, and I don't know, was it some kind of like graduation phase when you moved on to Doghouse Records? Were you kind of looking for a new home for your music at that point, or had that contract
I don't think we
almost?
were. No, in fact, I don't think there was one. It was all pretty much verbal with Good Life. Doghouse was, when the band first started in '96, that very first lineup, when we recorded the demo, Doghouse, Jade Tree, and Equal Vision were the three bands that I distinctly remember sending demos to with a letter. And we got rejected by all three of them. So it was a little funny to later do stuff on Doghouse and Equal Vision. But yeah, when I think he just got around to hearing the stuff and liked us and approached us, and it wasn't much of a, because we had already sought Doghouse out, or at least I was the only person left from that lineup. But everybody in that second incarnation of As Friends Rust that signed to Doghouse, we all also came up on like a lot of Doghouse bands. So it was very exciting to be, in the '90s. I mean, that was a band that was like, or that was a label, one of the main labels you would want to be on if you were playing whatever we were playing. Well,
it's interesting. I know, like in that time period, so 2000-ish time period, you had Victory, who was going through a phase, right? There's more Thursday than Earth Crisis. You had Equal Vision, who was, I'm trying to think who was, I mean, you still had Bane and whatnot, but they were kind of going through a transition too.
Saves the Day.
Yeah. And they themselves kind of straddled both lanes. But it's interesting, like you guys wouldn't have been out of place with the Get Up Kids, who was on the label, but even heavier bands. And this was all before the, All American Rejects and Say Anythings of the world were on Doghouse. But just, I guess the point is, it was an interesting phase for the whole scene, one, but two, Doghouse. And I think you were kind of in the middle of that.
Yeah. I think we were sort of a bridge, us and was Hot Water on Doghouse maybe around the same time? They might have been.
I'm not sure.
But yeah, I think we were sort of a transition band, like as they were kind of becoming this All American Rejects kind of label that they became. Yeah. Well, what was weird was we did have some conversations with Victory, actually. I think that was after one was released. I think there was a time where, to your point, we could have fit on kind of either, if you'd stuck us on just a hardcore label, it would have made sense.
Sure.
And then you would just hear the hardcore in As Friends Rust. But you put us on a label like that, and suddenly you hear the more melodic stuff, and the poppier elements stand out more. I don't know that I can speak. Well, I know that I cannot speak for myself as far as the third incarnation, the one incarnation. I hated all that shit by then. Like both of those camps were. I was still struggling, and a lot of it was just my own personal hangups, but I was still struggling to combat this image that people had of me from Culture and Morning Again.
Yeah.
And then I also, I personally, nothing against these bands or people, we've played with them all and they're all super talented and great people, but my heart would sink when people would tell me like, oh, you're one of my favorite three bands, you and Grade and Boy Sets Fire.
I could see that.
Yeah. I mean, I see it too, because I think those are all bands, Grade, Boy Sets Fire, Avail, Hot Water Music. That's basically, if we were going to get compared to any of our contemporaries at the time, those were them. And what I think we all accomplished that made us sort of really contemporaries was that we all sat at this intersection of punk and hardcore and emo in air quotes and just rock and roll and a little bit of kind of indie like outside influences too. We all did it differently, but we were all sort of a balanced mixture of the same ingredients, so I understood the comparison, and I understood where, like, if that's what appeals to you, you want a band is sort of straddling all of those different categories. You're probably going to like any band that does it and does it even remotely, well. So I got it from that perspective, but I just kind of, I was personally from kind of 98 on just really disenchanted with that scene. And I just didn't enjoy a lot of the bands that we played with. I didn't appreciate a lot of the comparisons we got. And I don't know kind of what I saw us as, but it wasn't. Yeah, it is sort of, you mentioned like Thursday or Thrice or whatever. It was sort of that when that chapter was beginning, I no longer knew what the hell was going on in music. And it wasn't for me. It was just, the production was taking a different turn. I don't know. It was, I guess it was just post-emo rock, which sounds good on paper. I don't know. It wasn't for me, and I felt like sort of a stranger in a strange land, in As Friends Rust, and doing tours with, and again, friends of ours, Further Seems Forever. We were doing tours with bands like that, and I was just like, what is happening? What is this? Like, this doesn't make any fucking sense at all. We sound like Dag Nasty, don't we? You know, and I don't think we did anymore, but at that point in 2000-ish, but it was confusing because I think I was still clinging to this idea of us just being this like melodic hardcore punk band that had like super chunky guitar leads and covered circle jerk songs. Yeah. So I didn't understand why we were like trying to get on bills with, Thursday.
That was probably because of what was starting to become the mainstream as far as that stuff went. And so you were kind of like, if you're going to get out there in front of people, that's the way you have to go. But if you're not into the music, that's tough. Like, because where else do you go? Do you just, you could try to do something smaller on your own, but that's probably a tough time for that. Just where you're at, kind of in between going from the Belgian label to Doghouse, which is making its name, and it's been around for 10 years or so at that point. But yeah, if you're like, it's almost like the timing was just off, right?
Yeah. And I would say that in the second incarnation of the band, where we were definitely a little sloppier and more kind of leaned a little more punk, which was the lineup that was active when Doghouse approached us. There were some conflicts in terms of direction, just because we all kind of came from different places and we all saw ourselves in different bands. One guitarist, James, I think sort of saw himself in like Lifetime / Get Up Kids, sort of very, very melody driven. Joe, the other guitarist, is a metalhead and just a shredder, Mm-hmm. And Tim was wanting to play a lot more kind of like, he was just listening to a lot of, I don't know, June 44 and Tortoise and, getting into like just mellower kind of stuff. And I was whatever. But those differences kind of made the sound, I think. It just brought a lot to the table. So it was kind of a rich dish that we were serving. Although the presentation was awful, the dish was, I think, really, really pretty tasty. And the last lineup, I'm very proud of One and the Equal Vision EP. There were still similar tensions musically, but I would say the one thing that was new was in the previous lineup where there were some disconnects in terms of influence. There were no disconnects in terms of ambition, in that none of us had any. We were just trying to eat, and touring was basically the easiest way to get like a steady meal. And it was fun. And, we liked the attention, and we liked the food and the travels, and, just making friends. And there's a reason that for like the 2 years that band was together, we wrote a total of 7 songs, and kind of pretty early on, and just kept playing them because we couldn't get our shit together in any other capacity. But that's a testament to how unambitious we were. The third lineup, that was kind of new because now there were like new elements in the band. And as I've already addressed, I have trouble kind of letting go of certain images of what the band is. So in my mind, you know, all right, it's a new lineup. It's 3 new guys. It's still me and Joe, but we're the same, you know, fucked up mess of a band, and this is going to be a blast. And it wasn't, because the guys that came into the band were not a mess, and they were also very ambitious. And that's where I think a real rift started, because, you know, I made the joke earlier about how on the first Culture tour, I was like, this is what I want to do for as long as I can get away with not having to think about doing something else, or however I phrased it. I think I was still there. I think it was just, I was living for the present, and it was just tour to tour. Let's do a new record, stick it to the old guys, you know, rub it in their faces that like, look, you know, full length finally did come out, because I'm petty. And, and just, I just wanted to keep the tour train rolling. But what I didn't realize was that other people who had come into the band, they wanted to tour also, but they wanted to tour so that we would get better visibility, so we could get on bigger tours, so we could be invited onto Warped Tour, so we could become one of those post-emo rock bands that were, you know, entering the mainstream. And that was just something that I have never thought about, to my detriment, I'm sure, you know, but it's just not, I don't know. There's never really been a point in my life where I thought, you know, even if I thought, I want to, if I'm going to fuck around and waste my teenage years, this is the way I want to waste it. I never once thought this is all I want to do for my whole life, and this is how I want to earn a living. That just sounds awful to me, you know? And even like when I see, I mean, people I know who do it, I'm just like, that does not look fun. Yeah. So that was sort of a big rift with that final lineup was, you know, there were finally people in the band that wanted to do something real with it. And I was just like, As Friends Rust? No. Nothing real for As Friends Rust.
So this is a good transition. I think it's a good transition into one. So like you said, you know, let's finally write the full length, you know, stick it to them, etc. So focus obviously shifts to that. Are there any goals with the writing process, or lyrically, or sound? Because at this point, it sounds like it's a game of musical chairs with members, right?
Yeah, well, it's sort of. I mean, it was 3 left at once, and 3 new ones came in. So it was as far as like lineup changes, it was a lot. You know, it was no Shai Hulud, where it was just this constant like, it was. I mean, we got lucky in that sense, I guess, where it was kind of just one. You know, the axe fell, and then we got some new people and got back to work. Stylistically, I think. You know, I trusted that everybody coming into the new band knew what band they were coming into. And I did like the prospect of getting, you know, better recordings and to kind of taking the recording process a little more seriously. I wasn't against like any level of professionalism, but I think it's hard with, and I'm just kind of addressing the music when I say this. It's hard to write an As Friends Rust song that Joe is on and not feel like it sounds like an As Friends Rust song, because I think his leads are like one of the more defining features of the music. And so you could take like a really sloppy, fast kind of punk song, and by the time Joe puts these weird sort of metal influenced kind of noodly leads on them, it sounds like As Friends Rust. You can take a song that and I feel like some of the later stuff sort of attempted to do this, was maybe like, are these guys listening to like a little too much Incubus or whatever, you know? And by the time he puts his leads on it, still an As Friends Rust song, every bit as much. So I didn't worry about kind of our songs not sounding like us, because honestly, every incarnation had a totally different sound anyway. So the third may as well. But I guess maybe I do sort of vaguely recall the influences that I knew each of the members had were a little concerning, because we had, like I said, you know, a guy that was really into Get Up Kids and Lifetime, and a guy that was really into Carcass, and a guy that was really into, you know, whatever. We did not have people that were into like, all of that sort of Thursday-ish stuff. I would say the previous lineup, like that was the one thing we had in common. We were all sort of shunning this new wave late 90s, early 2000s kind of, emo-y rock stuff. Just wasn't for us. None of us were interested. And finally, with the third lineup, we had at least one person that was very interested and very much paying attention to that and wanted in.
Wow. So we're nerds here, so we kind of pay attention to every little detail. And one thing we noticed, was this your first time working with a full-on producer?
With James Paul Wisner for one?
Yep.
Yeah,
James Paul, yep.
Sort of. The very first lineups recording, the one we took songs from for the demo tapes, and then they went on Fist of Time, track 2 on Fist of Time. Wisner recorded that. Actually, that was my first time recording with him. And I don't know where he came from, because I don't think he had done a whole lot in that scene yet. I feel like maybe our guitarist at the time, Henry, somehow knew him, and it was great. I mean, the quality, I think the quality on that first As Friends Rust recording it's very simple, but really, really clean and clear and warm. And so it wasn't my first time working with him, but I guess one was kind of the first thing that I was on that I felt was like actually produced.
Right.
Whereas that early As Friends Rust stuff, he tracked it and mixed it and it sounded great, but there wasn't really like much production quality, no studio tricks, no editing. Yeah. So one was one was definitely a turning point for me as far as recording, because it had always been just all right, rolling, go. And then if you fuck up, you start over. This was the first time where we were actually like, really exploiting or taking advantage of or abusing, I don't know.
All the above.
All the benefits of recording digitally, and having a grid and being able to edit and copy and paste shit, So yeah, it was new. It was a turning point. And personally, I'm a big fan of that style of recording. I'm not an analog purist where it's it's bullshit if it's not recorded live. I love editing everything, make it perfect.
So going into this, was that a conscious decision for you guys, or was that it just kind of fell into place that you were going to do that with James?
I don't remember how it came about. I know that with that second lineup, and at that point, when those 3 people left and the new 3 people came in, I think the couple of recordings we had done with that second lineup in Gainesville were pretty rough. And I feel like, because now there were these people in the band that were going to take the band more seriously, more, view it through a more professional lens, because there were different goals or ambitions. I think that recording any more in Gainesville, that was just off the table. That was not the quality that we needed to get wherever, on whatever thrice train they were trying to get on. So I think just by then, James Paul Wisner had been doing a lot more back in South Florida, where we were all from, but we're in Gainesville at the time. But he had been, busy with Dashboard Confessional, Newfound Glory, Further Seems Forever, that whole kind of pocket of South Florida bands. So I think, I don't remember how, but it makes sense that one of the first things that would have come up was like, what about James? Yeah. All of our friends' bands are recording with him. His shit sounds great. Those bands are getting huge. Let's, just drive home and record this album. And I guess, we had a recording budget kind of for the first time, and he could do it for that much money. So off we went.
Yep. So that must've been how you ended up having Chad Neptune, who was episode 19 guest for us. We talked to him way back last summer of 2020. Oh, cool. Yeah. Anthony was going through the liner notes the other day, sent us a picture. He's like, hey, check this out. And I was like, wow. We talked to Chad, now we're talking to Damien. This is pretty cool. So that must've been kind of the connection that you knew Chad. And then you had, a similar producer from Further Seems Forever, as well as you guys. And now he's singing some vocals, some backing vocals for you guys, right? That was it's pretty cool, full circle moment for us to be able to talk to you about it and then see his name too. That's got to be how that came about.
Yeah, that's right. He was part of the backups in the studio. Yeah.
Was he just hanging around?
He's a great guy. No, I think we probably we knew we needed backup, so we called some friends that we knew were in the area, and our bassist at the time, Tom, was really tight with Chad, and I think kind of that whole Further Seems Forever, Strong Arm kind of crew. So yeah, it's just a phone call away. Come by, we need backups. Yeah,
it never happened to me, man. Chad's an awesome dude. We had a blast talking to him.
Yeah, he's great.
I'm curious with One up to that point, because I think the Equal Vision EP is as melodic in as clean singing-y as One, but up to that point, One was the most, I think you sang on a record, and I think most melodic up to that point. Was that a product of like the new musicians in the band, bringing in this producer, you meeting in the middle? I'm just curious about, because in my head it's like, I'm not a musician. Like, does it just happen? Is it a conscious decision? So curious.
I don't know. It wouldn't have been the producer, because when we went down to record, I mean, the songs were pretty much what they were. I knew how I was going to sing everything and what needed backups. I've always been made fun of for having these kind of like PDFs, like color coded, and I have like all like the vocals are very mapped out. So that was all pretty buttoned up beforehand. I think it was just natural. I think that on the EP that the middle lineup did, there were a few songs on there where I started, I was taking it a step beyond. I went from this guy that screamed to yelled melodically, and then finally I was just like, what if there's not much yelling in it at all, and it's just more melodic? I think that started to happen on the EP on Doghouse and Good Life, and then the having more time in the studio and more tracks to play with, I think probably just enhanced it.
Yeah, a little more tools in the tool belt.
Yeah. And you're right. And by then, just all kind of aggressive. Well, I wouldn't say all aggressive. There's an aggression on some of the faster songs, or even the first song, like the verses are still pretty aggressive.
Yep.
But then I think it takes this like really sudden turn in the middle of that song to this like sort of almost new metal-y, like radio kind of weird chorus. So yeah, I guess that was new. I don't know where it was coming from. I guess it was just the songs, I was kind of serving the songs.
I'll never listen to that the same way again, now that you said that.
I just ruined it.
No.
Let's not talk about this record anymore.
No, just
and we have more questions though.
Yeah. I remember a lot of people being shocked because I got the comment a lot that like when I first put it on and it's We On Some Next Level Shit, it sounds like As Friends Rust. It's fast, you're scolding, and it's like there's this whatever, and then just like out of nowhere the chorus sort of blindsides you, and it's like, what the fuck are they doing? They've never done that before. And it's a weird chorus, it's a weird like melody.
Is it Don't Tell Me What I Need?
Yeah. So I think that was kind of, I'd love to say it was deliberate, like we wanted to really fuck with people's heads in the same song, in the first song, first track, just like get them really comfortable, like, oh, I'm on this familiar ride, and then just like fuck them up, but like it was just kind of I was serving the song, and I think that's kind of what the chorus just was asking for.
And I was thinking, as you were talking, Damien, not every band is, you have your Guns N' Roses, you have your Tool type bands that, I don't know, spend 15 years writing an album. You guys were working on this album kind of in a transitional phase, the way you're kind of phrasing it for the most part. Did you know you had something like in the recording session? Was it, I know it's always a deadline, so you kind of have to make the deadline, but yeah.
I definitely don't remember being worried that like people who already liked the band wouldn't like this. Even with those kind of different things happening, I still felt like people like As Friends Rust will like this. If anything, the recording's better, which is weird because now listening back to that, I'm like, ooh, that record is kind of rough to listen to now, especially compared to the EP that followed, which is like really warm and, but, did we know we had something? No, I mean, I knew this. I felt like the songs were good. I felt like there were a couple of filler songs. I'll admit that. I still do. But I felt like the album was strong. I was still petty enough that like I probably wouldn't have given a shit if it didn't feel that strong, because I was just sort of like took this like smug, satisfaction in the fact that like, the last album was, last lineup was together over 2 years and could never pull an album together. And this lineup's been together for a few months, and here we are in the studio, So I think I was not very admirably like excited about that. I don't know that I felt like that we had anything exceptional. I felt like we were just like, yeah, we're doing an album. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until I think it was done where I was just like, shit, this is kind of interesting. This is like, I don't know that I've heard a whole lot of stuff that sounds like us, I felt like that about the previous lineup, but again, there just wasn't enough meat to really, to be sure. Like, you can't run an experiment with just like a couple of samples,
Right.
So here in this single recording, there were already more songs than the total output of the previous lineup, and it felt like there was a little more to base that on, and not all of it was new. I mean, a lot of those differences or those sort of differentiating points that we had were kind of a common thread through every stage of the band. But it was the first time I was sort of sure that we didn't sound like too many other bands.
I think for me that the sequence of the album is perfect. I think We On Some Next Level Shit sets the stage beautifully. I think it comes out aggressive. It's got some melody. So you're like, all right, well, this is definitely As Friends Rust. It's maybe a little more melodic. I think the only filler song for me is track 2, 14 or so for me. And we're amongst friends. I can tell you that. That's the that's the only filler song.
It's a little cheap. It's a little cheap.
Well, it's short. And I think that's really what it is. But I think the album starts off phenomenal, and you get a taste of the album. It showcases that aggression in melody as well. I think the closer is, and this is a hot take, and I'm going to stand by it, I think it's possibly the best album closer of all time. And that's such a hot take. Oh. But I think it just showcases the range that is kind of hinted at during the album, but it just takes it to the next level. And it's interesting. I think before we were chatting and before we started recording, you were just saying that maybe there was some writer's block with that song. Like it was the last song written type of thing. Yeah.
It was the lyrics are about, forcing the song, just having nothing. And I think there might've been some, maybe at some point I'd kicked around the idea of it just being an instrumental. And then I was like, no, it needs vocals, but whatever, I'll be fine. I'll write them. I'll get them done. And then at the time, I don't know, I was smoking a lot of weed, and I probably just didn't get around to it. So in the studio, I wrote it, and I may have approached it a little overconfidently, and I remember being pretty like stuck, and I was just like, well, I'll just write about being stuck. Yeah. That was, I will say I was sort of dogging on the whole, like, let's jump on this train where like all these, bigger labels are starting to pay attention to melodic bands from the kind of punk, hardcore, emo-y sort of circles. But there was some really interesting stuff on that album that in spite of those sort of shallow ambitions, there was some stuff that I think was like really kind of artful and like, even I think the instrumentation on 10, even there's another one was there another really weird song on there?
Well, Last Call's kind of a
Last Call was a weird one that kind of went almost into like
different. Yep.
Yeah, it almost had like it was like it had some helmety vibes, and then it has like, I think that's the one where there are some guitar leads where there's like a lot of like wah pedal kind of like slashy. It almost gets like kind of Guns N' Roses-y. Like there's this like slashy guitar thing happening. And I always loved that. I was like, oh, this is, I think that might've been the song that like that one and Perfect Stranglers were, once I got a taste of sort of like the darkness that could be injected into As Friends Rust. I think there's a lot more of that on the EP that followed.
Totally. Yep.
But that's kind of when I realized with those two songs, I was like, oh, this kind of works. And this is like now a whole nother, side that I can put into this too. And starting to sing about like on Last Call, it's really just about kind of the seediness, you know, of nightlife and just everybody out there, you know, trying to build a case for why they should get laid.
Yeah, that's exactly how it feels too when you listen to it. And then especially that last part at the end, you're just like, oh yeah, yep, this is how it's supposed to go.
Yeah. Yeah, there was I guess there were a couple of I guess Morning Lever was sort of down the same path. Sure. Yeah, you know, now that I think about it, lyrically, One was pretty. Maybe it was across the board darker than I remember it. There's the won't be the first time thing and 10, but yeah, there's This Is Me Hating You, Morning Lever, Last Call. Yeah, We On Some Next Level Shit is, you know, it's more, you know, it's about whatever scene shit, but it's still a little dark, I guess. So yeah, I don't know. I think maybe that's how the disconnect that I felt in sort of like my own band, you know, feeling estranged in my own band was manifesting itself. I do know that I don't know that I can say that it happened on One, because by then the lineup was still new enough that I don't think the problems that eventually led to me leaving my own band had really like manifested fully by then. So I think I was still pretty excited about like, hey, we're in new shit, we're gonna do an album. But I do remember that by the time the EP was being written, I pretty much had stopped going to practices because there was so much tension. There was such a rift. I had stopped going to practices. I'm sure they didn't mind. And I would get it. Somebody would drop off a tape or something of like, all right, there's, you know, ignore the second one that's not done. We're going to finish it next week. But there's that other new song I told you about's on this tape. And I was like, thanks, man. And then I would listen to it and write lyrics. And I don't remember a whole lot of practicing the songs before recording them, like with the band.
Oh, wow.
Just that we had dates. They went down, they tracked. I remember just being like, okay, you're going down on this date to start doing drums, bass, guitars. When will you be done? Because that's when I'll come down. Yeah. And, you know, it was a very, like, I wasn't there when any of the music was tracked. None of it. It was all done. And that's not something I would have been. I was way too much of a control freak pretty much throughout all the bands I had been in before then to have ever even dreamed of doing that. But I just didn't want to be there. So I remember coming down. One guitarist, Floyd, he stayed and hung out while I did the vocals. We were fine. We were always good. But I do remember that when I wrote those songs, there was a deliberate attempt to try and get in their heads, like what kind of vocals do a bunch of guys, well, maybe not a bunch of guys, again, it might just be one, but what kind of vocals does somebody who wants to be heading down that you know, that path, what are they hoping I'll sing here?
Interesting. That's so interesting.
Because I'm gonna just do the complete fucking opposite.
Yeah. I almost asked, but you beat me to it.
It's got some of those darker elements of One, but it is meaner, I think, in some ways, and definitely a little more cynical. But yeah, I was like, I wanted to make sure no major heard anything they liked. And even though the production I wanted that to be slick because I was really into this. Like after One, I was like, man, I love having records that sound good and like really tracking and really, you know, coming out of the vocal booth and being sent right back in because no fucking way. That sucked. I like that. I like that whole process. So I did want a good record, but I didn't want it to be signable. You know, I wanted it to be like maybe, I guess what we might call like I would have been content just being like a band's band or like a cult band where it's like the people who get us like us, that's enough. And I guess that's kind of what we've actually always been. But
yeah. So I got a question for you, and you don't have to answer it if you don't want to. I've known you for an hour now, roughly. Does today you regret any of that? Like, do you wish you hadn't done that? Or is that like, you're fine with being the band's band? That's cool. Like, don't worry about it.
No, okay. I'm good with all of it.
Awesome.
Yeah. I think it all happened the way it should. And I think even reuniting years later and you know, there was never a thought in anyone's mind. I mean, it wasn't my thing that I was like, there's interest in a reunion. Which lineup am I going to approach, or which members am I going to pull together? As far as I know, even though the band had been active and there was no talk of a reunion, it was always just the second lineup that kept in touch. Mm-hmm. And wow. I kind of, in a weird way, I sort of even felt like, even though 3 people from that lineup left and 3 new people came in and we did a record and an EP, I still felt like those other guys were in the band. Mm-hmm. They were maybe just on a hiatus and these were temps. And like, how funny that the temps are getting like, real records done and writing more songs. But it still just never felt like As Friends Rust to me. And pretty much as soon as I left that band, I became friendly with all the second lineup again. And it still just sort of felt like we were in a band that was just kind of inactive. Mm-hmm. till we felt like being active again. So when that came up, I don't remember it being a weird thing where like I had to go, dig up all these old members from under a rock and just be like, still remember how to play the guitar? Right. We were all talking all the time already. So it was just like, it was an idea that sort of came to all of us at the same time. And that was just the way it was going to be. And so ever since, 2008 now, which is 13 years, which is longer, incidentally, than the band's career when it was active. It's always been the second lineup.
Interesting.
What's really another interesting thing about this album is something that usually happens on a retrospect or like a repress or like a deluxe album is the fact on the original press and, any traditional record for one is you had cool liner notes, like little tidbits on certain songs, things that like usually, in the time, especially 2001, like internet was kind of young. Finding anything on a band, songmeanings.com, all that stuff was kind of irrelevant at the time. So it would kind of give us kind of heads up on the songs and kind of direct from the artist, which is really rare. It's almost like a pop-up video type thing, which we thought was cool.
Yeah, I think that was a carryover maybe from me being into more of going back to those kind of culture days where I was by then paying more attention to ebullition bands who were like a little more politically kind of, Downcast and Groundwork. And I feel like all of those records, liner notes were a big part of it. I remember, having a lot of inserts where like you'd pull it out and for each song, there were like 2 blocks of copy. And like first there was the introduction, the, all right, here's what this is about. Here's, whatever, what you need to be pissed off about. And which is good. I mean, because that was kind of a way to sort of learn a little bit more about, or just it was some insight into like what issues were important to other people, So I think it might have just been a carryover from that, where it was like, I guess I could just put the lyrics in, but shouldn't I write something about the lyrics?
Mm-hmm. We love that shit. I mean, that's what we call nerdery. That's our word for that stuff. Yeah. Whether it be tangible or not. In this situation, it's tangible because we can have it in our hands and read it. But to get the story behind the story, that's the stuff that we live for as music fans. So
curious on any special meaning to the album title, One. Like, was this you saying I won because I put an album out? Was that sticking it to him?
That was like 75% of it. Nice. Yeah. It was definitely, I remember Joe and I kind of having a chuckle because it was just like, see that? We didn't fall apart. We pulled a lineup together super fast. We wrote 10 songs strangely quickly. And yeah, we fucking did it. We won. But it was also just, I like a little wordplay, and it was the first album, and which felt like a big accomplishment because this was a band that just didn't seem like it was ever going to do one.
Right on. All right. So the album's out. You tore off it briefly. You put out the EP, which that EP has a phenomenal name, which I think goes over so many people's heads. I think that was probably, having conversed with you for the last hour, it was probably your doing. Young trophy band in the parlance of our time. Is that right?
I don't remember if it was mine, but it might have been. Yeah, I think that was just a movie that we were all kind of watching constantly, and yeah, I think it probably was one of those cases of we don't really have anything prepared or anything like super meaningful for a title. And somebody probably just proposed that because it was funny, or maybe there had been an inside joke kicking around and we were just like, there it is, let's do it.
And it works. It works. So back to 20 years. It's going to turn 20, I think, mid-October. So in, another month. Looking back, do you think it holds up? Are you more proud of it now? Are you surprised people still like it? I'm so curious kind of where you're at with it.
I do think it holds up. I would say I'm more proud of it now. I wasn't ever ashamed of it, and I have been ashamed of some recordings I've been on. Yeah. I was never ashamed of one. I was always proud of it. I think what I'm proud of now is really just the fact that, like, now that experiment has been kind of it's been running longer. Now I'm definitely certain that, like, that did not sound like, you know, other shit happening at the time, or yep. maybe even before or since. And I think that can be said, you know, about like a lot of bands, but it can't be said about far more bands. I don't know if I phrased that in any way that makes sense, but
we get the gist of it. We get it.
Yeah. We were far from the only band that, like, didn't really sound like other bands.
Right.
But that's a much smaller pool, you know, than yep. bands that do just fucking sound like every other band, or you know, there's so I'm still very proud of that, just because it's kind of every time I listen to it, I just feel more and more certain that, like, oh yeah, we are a cool, you know, I'm proud of all the shit I've done with all the bands, just because of the experience it was for me on a personal level. But I can't say that they've all sounded like terribly unique, you know, or distinctive. But As Friends Rust, I think, is the one band where it's like, yeah, no, there's no, I don't know. I think over the years, I've had a few people send me like things where, like, my friend thinks this has, you know, big As Friends Rust vibes, or hey, this kind of sounds like you guys. What do you think? And I'll listen to it. I'm like, I mean, maybe like there's something in the guitars or whatever, but I just don't. I never really hear it, you know. And you have bands like great band. What's the newer band that sounds like they sound exactly like Turning Point? One Step Closer.
I literally just gonna say them, because I'm wearing they're on Triple B Records, and I'm wearing the T-shirt right now.
Yeah. I don't know about their newer stuff. Yep. I think they might have taken like one step further from that, but whatever they put out like a year or two ago was super Turning Point, and totally. It was like, yep. I'm sure that wasn't, you know, an accident, and that's cool. I mean, but I'm still relieved when I hear one, to just know that, like, oh, cool, we didn't even like accidentally sound like this other band that I wasn't aware of at the time, but later heard, and like, yeah, we were on the same trajectory because we're made up of the same types of guys into the same type of shit. It still just sounds fresh, and I feel like, yeah, I'm very happy with everything that's happened to this band. It's been sort of perfect. You know, all the mishaps have been perfect.
It's cool to have that to look back on too, and be like, yeah, this is great. I stand by it. I love it. We don't sound like anybody else, and you don't. I mean, there are people, I think, that have pulled from you since then in the last 20 years, and I think even to this day there are probably bands that are doing that. But I don't know that there's anybody, especially from that time frame, that you guys were, like you said, a band that didn't sound like anybody else, and there are less of you around then, and I would say today, even less bands that do that. There's a lot of people putting music out, but you know, people in the world that you were in, it didn't happen a lot.
Yeah, we're definitely in a very samey sort of time right now, where there's a lot of like reverence for, and like just this, there's a lot of nostalgia worship. And totally. A lot of band, you know, it kind of went from, like, at least in the late 90s, early 2000s, when all those bands were doing that thing that I didn't like, it was current. Now it's like 20 something years later, and bands are trying to do sounds from 20 something years ago. Yep. So that's a little weird. Or 30 something. I mean, you got like, there's a whole wave of sort of 80s hardcore bands happening in parallel to a whole wave of 90s, you know, metallic hardcore, even like vegan straight edge kind of revival stuff. And it doesn't feel like it's like there's a whole lot of innovation. There are bands like, you know, Angel Dust and Turnstile and Zulu, and like there are a lot of bands doing like really interesting, cool stuff and pushing the envelope. I would say even like Cold World on sort of the harder kind of end of things, just doing just weird shit. So there are still plenty of bands out there, and I love hardcore strangely more now than ever. Certainly than, you know, in a way that I hadn't, you know, since before like 96-ish. But there's a lot of just straight up like, we're going to start a band that sounds like Earth Crisis and Strife. We're going to start a band that sounds like old, you know, whatever, Morning Again even, or there are a lot of those.
But that's a good thing.
I guess so. Yeah. It is. It's fun, you know, and I guess if it's a style that you love enough, you'll endure it for decades.
Yep.
I've never been that contented with anything for too long, so it doesn't work for me. But yeah, it's a weird thing, you know, and it works for a lot of people. I mean, there are a lot of bands doing stuff like that. There are a lot of people who think that way, to even think to do that in the first place, because it's not just the subject matter. When it's the full package, it's the guitar parts, it's the lyrics, it's the artwork is like straight up 90s artwork. You know, I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, there were a bunch of bands doing the whole like lowercase serif, you know, kind of names with a little, and then there was like strike throughs across every name, and it just, everything felt like very like 94, 95. And again, you know, that's fine. I live in the past with certain shit. I collect things that connect me with the past, but I think like it's one thing to sort of express your nostalgia through like the stuff you read or collect or listen to or display on a shelf. It's another to like, you know, where there's like cosplay.
Yeah, I was going to say reinvent, do it yourself.
Yeah. Like I'm going to like, it's one thing to be into like 90s hardcore. It's another thing to just like start trying to bring back Jenkos and, you know, bandanas and like your shirts, you know, you're only printing like mustard and forest green and maroon shirts and fucking ringers.
You mean like what I'm wearing right now?
That's more of a camel, I would say. Yeah. But you know, it's weird. I don't know. I mean, we all draw from certain inspirations, and I'm sure at any point, everybody's always just been like, man, I would love to add this, like, sort of, you know, a touch of this band or kind of approach it from this perspective. But it's an entirely different thing to just be like, we need to study them and we need to become them.
Right.
You know, like we're going to be a cover band that plays originals.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's a running joke on here. It's Greta Van Zeppelin is kind of like the
exactly
quintessential like, Zeppelin's awesome. Yeah. So let's just make a new Zeppelin.
Yeah. And didn't they deny Zeppelin even being an influence?
How could you even?
They say like they've heard a few songs. They say they heard a few songs, and it's like,
me too.
Okay. I mean, if you're a musician, you've only heard a few Zeppelin songs, and you really haven't really studied music, basically.
Right. Yeah. Especially if you're going to go ahead and rip them off wholesale.
Right.
And if you're that good of a musician too, they're good.
Exactly. They're great. Yeah.
So you know they fucking heard Zeppelin.
Yeah.
You can't be like that good of a rock musician without.
Yeah.
You know.
You had to.
Yeah. And I guess it could be argued that like, okay, yes, Zeppelin was great, but Zeppelin's not around anymore.
Right.
Can't we just have another one?
Yeah.
Right.
You know, it's a sound argument, right? Except that like, yeah, you can, I guess by that argument, there's nothing wrong maybe with having like a band that's kind of kicking out new songs that feel like those songs. The problem is those songs were a product of their time and you don't live in that time. So like they weren't
40, 50 years later.
Yeah. And sure, they were inspired by other stuff. And Robert Plant was like a blues singer, and they were all rooted in kind of rhythm and blues. Sure. But what culminated as like, you know, Zeppelin was it was still current. And even if you want to make the argument that they were just trying to be something that existed a few years before them, like, cool. Well, now it's been decades since then. So yeah, just it's. I mean, I don't mind it. I love Zeppelin. They're one of my favorite bands of all time. I just don't. But I still don't. I don't need any more of them. I love the Pixies, but like one's enough. You know.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and to not to belabor the Zeppelin point, but they kind of added riffs to blues stuff, whereas Greta Van Zeppelin is just redoing it. They didn't change it. Right. They didn't add something to it to make it a little more their own. It's like, here we are again, 40 years later, 50 years later, as opposed to Zeppelin was like, here's some blues songs, but we threw a riff into it and some cool drum solos and
a
and
great
maybe
rhythm. We plagiarized a little bit, but that was also, they were coming off the heels of an era where like standards and traditional songs and were sort of, that was more common than not. So like, I think they probably weren't even viewing it that way. It was just like, oh shit, yeah, and then this Robert Johnson song, we can like take that bit and work it into this. I don't think they saw it as like, no one's ever going to know that this was, some Delta blues guy. They've never heard of him. Don't worry about it. I think they were just like doing what musicians did at the time, and yeah, they were innovating. Even sometimes just incrementally. Sometimes they were like big, sort of sea change kind of innovations. But you're right. This isn't Greta Van Fleet. Isn't they're not then taking that and innovating further. Right. It's almost like the IP expired, like the patents up. Exactly. So they were just like,
now everybody
cool.
can do it.
Now we can do it. Yeah,
that's so good.
Your blood pressure medication. Everybody can make this now.
Right. Yeah.
That was a tangent.
That was good.
I liked it all. I'm not gonna lie to you.
See, that's the thing though. It's like there's a way to do it where it's like if you do it and it feels like there's some authenticity and you are just killing it. There's like passion behind it. You can pull it off.
Yep.
But if you're a band that's just like, you figured out how to play songs like that, write songs like that, and sing songs like that, but you don't have the same conviction behind it or the same passion for it, you're just going to come off as 4 or 5 kids who figured out how to write songs like that and sing songs like that.
All right, we can dial it back. So coming off the heels of one, you put out the EP on Equal Vision, which we love, and then 18 years later, you put out an EP last year in 2020. I have the 7-inch. It's awesome. Love the 2 songs. So you never really finished creating music, and I think that comes through with your... Is it a solo project or is it your band, Damien Done? So that's active now. How would you kind of describe that? It's
yeah. Well, there's a band. Well, there's a band now. Actually, no, sorry. There was a band. Now the band is sort of drummerless and also hasn't practiced since the pandemic hit. So it's like people on sort of standby and just doing stuff remotely. The other guitarist and I have continued writing songs kind of through email. Our bassist is just like, let me know, when you need me. If we're going to start practicing again, I'm down. If we're going to start playing again, I'll have to think about it, but I'm probably down at some point. If you need me to track on anything, let me know. So actually there's a whole new record that's ready to go for Damien Done. But yeah, it's a solo project in the sense that I'm writing the songs.
Yep.
And on the album, because that was before there was a band put together, I was programming all the drums, programming bass, which actually James Paul Wisner replayed on actual bass, and he mixed and produced that, added some guitars too. So the band originally came together just to back up live shows, and then eventually started writing songs together, or I would start just bringing new songs and they were kind of weighing in on their parts, and it became more of like a real band. So we did an EP, recorded it actually like weeks before the pandemic hit, and that came out last year, and that's very full band sounding. And now we're about to kind of make things a little confusing because the album is very not full band sounding. It sounds like two guitarists who wrote the songs through email. So a lot of electronic elements and programmed drums, and it's taken a little bit of a synthier turn. But I guess I don't know. It was a solo project. Then I felt weird calling it a solo project once I had a backing band, even though most solo artists have backing bands. But now, you know, with those guys weighing in last year on some songs, and then Tyler, the other guitarist, weighing in heavily through email. And actually one of the songs that'll be on the new album is a song that he just wrote and was like,
nice,
I got one, and it's great. So I don't know. I don't know what to call it. I guess I think of it still or now as more of a band.
Nice.
That was a long way to just say the band.
No, we like
a band.
that stuff. Yeah. We want to hear all about that. We love to know the inner workings of that stuff, because we like try to put ourselves in those shoes, but we're not musicians. We don't have those relationships. I think our relationship is just like texting each other. Let's figure out how we want to do the podcast stuff. But like to hear it from a musician side is what we're always striving to find out. So
cool. Yeah, and do you know? I don't know if you know, but the Damien Done project, even though it kind of really just picked up in like 2016 and then 2018, started immediately after I left As Friends Rust.
Wow.
That was like I was out of that band, and for the first time in a long time was like bandless. And my girlfriend at the time had a guitar. She played in bands, and I was just like, I still want to make music. I don't want to be in a band. I don't want to make music with anyone else. Yep. So I just started, you know, I remembered someone telling me like, oh, tune the low string down from E to D, and then you only need like one finger to do power chords. And I just kind of wrote the first batch of Damien Done songs like that right after leaving As Friends Rust. And then those weren't released until 2016, but that was 2002 that they were written. Yeah. So the two are a little bit related, I think.
Yep.
And I always kind of joked that there's a song on the last EP, the last As Friends Rust EP, Up and Went.
Yep.
Where like that was the first time that I actually and I think there were just 3 chords or something, like, but chords that I wrote, like a guitar melody, went on tape. I think I was still too like shy and new to guitar to dare strum those simple power chords myself. So I had Floyd, the guitarist that stayed and hung out with me while I tracked vocals. I think I had him strum them. But I would kind of joke for a while that was essentially the first Damien Done song.
Wow. Did you change a lot of them between 2002 and 2016, or did you just kind of clean them up and let them go?
No, James Paul Wisner, when I asked him, I was like, hey, do you still have all that shit from 14 years ago? Because some label for some reason wants to put it out. He was like, I do, let me take a listen and I'll send it over. And then I remember he did a little bit of remixing. He was like, do you mind if I brighten this up like just a touch? So he did something to it, but it was pretty much just the same stuff. And
wow, that's cool.
Live, we played them the same way, except that with a full band, it was just much bigger and heavier and more distorted. Yeah.
That's awesome.
But yeah, the two As Friends Rust songs last year, that was fun. That was exciting. That was also, I tracked the vocals for those the weekend that kind of the shit hit the fan with COVID. My wife and son were supposed to come to Florida with me, and we were going to I was going to record for a couple days, and then we'd make a vacation out of it, stay for like another week or so. And they ended up the night before I flew canceling. And I went, I think when I headed down on like a Thursday night or Friday, I forget, I was still sort of feeling like everyone's overreacting, you know?
Yep.
And I spent Saturday and Sunday tracking with James Paul Wisner again for those 2 songs. And by the time I left South Florida or Florida to come back home Sunday night or Monday morning, I remember like everything happened that weekend. Our whole perspective on it as a nation shifted.
Yep.
And by the end of that weekend, I was thinking, should I not fly home? Should I rent a car and drive back to Michigan? Because I don't know that I want to be on a plane or in an airport. You know, it's getting fucking crazy. Even though it didn't, you know, it really got crazy like, you know, months later or a month later. But Yeah, it was that weekend was when I wrapped up the vocals for that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the weekend we started the podcast.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Hey, you were ahead of the boom because like everyone else started theirs like a few months
6 months
into
later.
the,
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
We already had like 40 episodes down.
Yeah, but that was two songs that like one of them we had been kicking around. I feel like since we first did the first reunion, or it maybe since like 2010ish.
Wow.
The one that became Up From the Muck had been kicking around in a couple of different versions. Most of them vocalists, entirely vocalists. Just the music had been kicking around for a while. And a lot of songs kept coming up since our first reunion. We talked about doing a new record since 2008, and we're just a very slow band, and we're spread across the country and overthink things, I think. But that was one of the ones that survived like many calls over the years. Yeah. It always stayed in there, so that was kind of that was one of them. And then I think the other one, Last of the Famous International Scumbags.
Yep.
That one was, on the other hand, like brand new. I feel like that one came in just kind of right in the nick of time, and we were like, oh, here, this one. Nice. That'll be the other song. So one from Joe and one from James, respectively. But yeah, I was a little nervous about sending those into the world because I was like, man, I hate when bands come back after like,
long breaks,
10, 20 years, and they just put out something that's just so benign and just dull, and usually weaker. Like there are bands like Propaganda that like only get just meaner, and there's just more anger and vitriol and like speed and intensity. And then there are bands that just they finally come back, and it's like just such a watered down version of what they used to be, which is like, all right, I get that might be us like emotionally or like physically compared to what we were 10, 20 years ago, but like we don't need to make it so obvious in the new songs.
Yeah. I mean,
so I was glad
it can go either way. It can, I mean, in some instances it's a caricature of themselves, or it's them, kind of flexing, well, this is who we are now. And in both respects, it's not genuine. But I think with you guys, that 7-inch is fantastic. It's exciting that you're still working on the Damien Done stuff. I think anything with your name on it, we're going to check out at this point. And, I think looking back from the beginning till now, the fact that you're still putting out music in some medium and with some vehicle, whatever vehicle it might be, is a lot of fun for us to keep looking forward to.
Wow. Thank you, man. That's it's still such a weird thing for me. I mean, I've been doing this a while, I guess, and in sort of almost an obnoxious amount of bands, but it's like it never stops just being so fucking wild to me that anybody gives a shit, or that anybody's like been following it. And and a lot of times I'm just very focused on kind of what I'm working on now. So there's a new As Friends Rust record that's also it's written.
Wow. All right.
Nice.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah.
I'm perked up. I'm
still some lyrics to fill in. They won't be written in the studio like 10 was, but still a couple of things to sort of button up. But the songs are there. They're selected and they're ready, and we're just trying to figure out when we'll all be ready enough to just start tracking them. So I'm always just focused on like what's happening currently, and it's just still so wild to me that like the stuff from the past, made any kind of impact, I guess, kind of outside of my local scene. Like it never stops just being so like bonkers that people in other states, let alone countries or continents, like even other states or fucking cities, have the stuff and know the songs well, and it means something to them, and they've shared it with somebody, or there's a lyric that really resonates with them, or a ringtone that gets passed between spouses, or whatever. It's
roommates.
It's just it's fucking wild, and it always kind of brings me back to like there's a thing that I've talked about this a lot in the past, but it always kind of brings like a big turning point for me with hardcore I was already kind of familiar with some of the more sort of, exuberant punk stuff, where there was more costumery and like pomp and circumstance and, big Liberty spikes and stuff. So it was still kind of had that inaccessibility that like a lot of like metal has, where it's like, just, these are characters. They're not kids. They're not, they're not my people. They're characters that appeal to my people.
Yep.
But Minor Threat was sort of that epiphany for me, where like looking at photos of Ian in the crowd, and like there's just no difference in appearance or even elevation because he's on the floor. And just that blurred kind of line between like band and audience, where the community is the band and the audience.
Right.
It's not the fans. Like in metal, the community is the fans. The bands are something else.
Yeah.
That's like a product on a different tier in another dimension. But in hardcore, like that really, really resonated with me. And those images just painted this whole picture of kind of like what I think I would just turn out to be chasing my whole life, which is like that bond, or that sort of, sense of community and relatability, I guess. So when I hear any of that shit where anybody, is just, cites a record that like, I know where I lived when I wrote those lyrics. I know what like mess I was and how poor I was, or, how fucked up I was and whatever, when I wrote that shit, and it just meant like something else to somebody else, and it's stuck with them all these years. It's just, it's still surreal. You'd figure by now it would just be like, oh, cool. You like my bands. What do you guys want to talk about?
It's the reason we're chatting today. I mean, it's a testament to that. And that's why we wanted to not only, celebrate what you've done and as Friends Russ, but, give one the attention in the light that it deserves. And I think you've been fantastic in, kind of painting that picture for us. And so we completely thank you for coming on. And this has been awesome. Like we said, we've been circling this wagon. You've answered questions that I've had since I got that Doghouse Equal Vision sampler in 2002, which we posted online. So this has been kind of a homecoming moment for us. So we thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Wow, that was a full-on nerd session with Damien. Super gracious to have him on and kind of a deep dive on his scene, and learn a lot about what was going on during that time, and really kind of highlighted the fact that after 2001, it was kind of a hybrid of genres that he highlighted pretty deeply. But really cool to just deep dive mainly on the album One, which we all really adore. So that was fucking awesome. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I really, really enjoyed that conversation. Being a little later to the album, obviously, Twan, you were in it in the moment. And Nate and I are a little later bloomers to it, but like totally getting it even, today, it still holds up. It still sounds great. And to hear kind of how that all came about from Damien himself, pretty rad, man. Like, and he didn't pull any punches. He told us the whole thing, and there was nothing, no stone left unturned. And I'm excited that, As Friends Rust isn't over as a band. Like, there's still, kicking the tires and doing some stuff, and maybe we'll hear something new from them in the fairly near future.
Yeah, I'm really excited for that. And I mean, I don't allude to this in the interview. I say it. Like, these are questions that I've had for 20 years or upwards of 20 years. So to hear it from the person that created it, the kind of the brain of the vocals and the lyrics, it's kind of a full circle moment. As music fans, you often think there's like some elaborate story, and there's, you have concocted in your head how things came about. So to hear it, how it actually happened, it's like behind the music on a much smaller scale. And, I think that conversation went as good as it could have gone. Like, we geeked out, and later this year, we'll plan to drop kind of the second half of it, which gets away from One and is more, like we say, general music chatter and reaction to some new bands and things like that, which we want everyone to hear that. It was a great conversation.
When you say behind the music on a smaller scale, but also on a larger scale, like a little deeper, a little further into the weeds than you would get on a half-an-hour VH1 show. Like, we get way more than we would ever get from that.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah, you said it. It's like nerds at the bar, basically. We've already wrapped. Everything's cut. So production crew is hanging out with the band and just asking the nerd questions. We're kind of both in that sense.
Yep.
Yeah.
Totally.
But yeah, we hope you enjoyed it. If you're new to the podcast, we appreciate you checking us out. If you're a longtime listener, yeah, keep coming back. This is what we do. We'll keep doing this, and
we got some cool stuff lined up for you in the next couple of weeks. I mean, man, I am stoked for our fall. Like, it feels like we've got some stuff happening. The things in the hopper. We've had, it feels like 2 or 3 guests lined up for 3 months. There always seems to be something ready to go in the percolator. So check us out. Listen to us next week, the week after. Like, rate, share, subscribe, tell a friend, and continue being a podhead. We love you. Yeah,
it's been real. It's getting better and better, man. I totally agree with what you're saying. We have things lined up, and it's only going to get bigger and bigger. So thanks for everyone listening, and thanks for Damien for coming on tonight. Cheers.
We'll see you next week.
Peace, podheads.
Peace.
It done been so long since I done held you in my arms.
Actually, hey, that reminds me real quick. Damien, what is the little ditty at the end of 10?
Oh, man.
It done been so long since I held you in my arms.
I heard that I remember listening to that maybe like a year ago or whenever the last time I kind of made it through the record or whatever. And I had forgotten about it. And I remember distinctly thinking, this is problematic. This is it's a little, but whatever. Honestly, it came from, I loved in the 90s, aside from hardcore and early 90s hip hop, I loved slow jams. Loved Shai and Jodeci and Boyz II Men and fucking Jodeci. Gerald Levert and Keith Sweat and all that shit. Yeah. And I think it was just sort of this I don't know if it was a joke that I would make or sing or whatever, but it was just this kind of it just made me feel like I was in a Boyz II Men video. It's just that little breakdown where we're going to talk now and I'm going to tell you how much you mean to me and baby come back, kind of thing.
That's so good.
And I don't know, it was just a weird thing that I don't know if it was even supposed to be on tape, but he got. And then I think there was something similar. Was there something similar on the EP? Was there a hidden track on the EP?
All right, so I thought there were 2 little ditties in one, and then I remember going back and trying to find the second one, couldn't find it. So it must be on the EP.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think one of them was just that whole girl, it done been so long. But then there was another one that was it was a weird beat that was made of.
Oh yeah, dum or something like that.
Yeah, that's at the end.
That's at the end of.
That's on.
No, that's the end. That's the
one.
Same. That's at the end of one.
That's the same one.
Thing. Yeah.
I think on the EP there's one that's made up of a bunch of where James chopped up all of the snarls and kind of and made come on, wasn't it that, or was that also at the end of one?
Well, that had to have been off of the EP because
that's the EP, yeah,
because it's the what happened to the good old days. She said, come on, that's from that song.
Yes, yeah. So it had those come ons and it had a bunch of weird snarly I don't know, raccoon noises that I guess I made on different tracks. And and he made a weird little glitchy kind of sample scratchy thing with those whatever weird Damienisms or whatever.